All right, I'd like to call the Saline City Council work meeting to order at 6:02 p.m. Members present are Council Members Camara Sulak, Del Orco, Gearbaugh Rice, Mayor Pro Tem Dillon, and Mayor Marl. Council Member Seal will be absent from both the work meeting and regular meeting this evening. Staff present is City Manager O'Toole, Clerk Royal, and Engineer Humphreys. At this time, the Chair would entertain a motion to approve the agenda as submitted unless there are amendments.
We'll move.
As submitted, Mr. Gearbaugh?
Correct.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Camara Sulak. All those in favor of approving the agenda as submitted signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. Is there a motion now to excuse the absence of our colleague, Mr. Seal?
So moved.
Moved again by Mr. Gearbaugh. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Dillon. All those in favor of excusing the absence of Mr. Seal, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. We come now to citizen comments. Under the Open Meetings Act, any person may come forward at this time, make comment or question to City Council. This public comment period will be limited to 3 minutes per person. Anyone who would like to speak is requested, but of course not required to state his or her name and address for the record. Are there any citizen comments from those in attendance this evening? The record will reflect there are none. Clerk Royal, did we receive any written communiques in advance of tonight's meeting in which the individual wanted their remarks read at this time? Easy enough. Then we transition to the one and only discussion item of the evening, which is which was our forthcoming transportation asset management plan. And I'd first defer to City Manager O'Toole if she'd like to make any remarks, and then I can, if not, I can transition immediately to City Engineer Humphreys. Excellent. City Engineer Humphreys, the floor is yours.
Is this on?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Well, thank you. I'm excited about this presentation tonight. I think you've, since I've started, I've talked a lot about asset management and the right fix at the right time. And this is our first ever transportation asset management plan. And I'm going to let Marcus McNamara, who's here with us tonight from OHM, go through a short PowerPoint presentation, hopefully take about 10, 15 minutes, and then open the floor for some discussion back and forth.
We welcome our guests. Make sure the green light is illuminated at the base.
Got it. So as Tesha mentioned, we've been working on this for a few months now. Excited to be here tonight. We got some pretty good news, I think. We got a good strategy we'd like to share with you, but the prognosis is good for your road network. So keep this relatively informal. Feel free to interrupt me if I use an acronym that I don't explain enough or anything else. Stop me and we'll clarify. We'll start off with, and you do have the full-blown report, I believe, in your packet. So that's got a lot higher level of detail. We tried to condense that down for the slideshow presentation. So here's just at a glance some network figures. You have almost 35 miles, centerline miles of road in the city system. It's split 60% local, 40% major. And of that, almost 14 miles of major streets, almost 10 miles are federal aid eligible, which means they're eligible for federal funding, which is administered through the Washington Area Transportation Study through WATS, which Tasha is on the FAC committee. The average PASER rating, we'll explain PASER just a little bit more in a second, but it has been dropping slightly over the last couple of years, and we'll explain why that is and how we're going to get it going back up. The PASER rating is a rating scale that was actually developed in Wisconsin, but it's supported by the Michigan DOT at a state level. The Transportation Asset Management Council, which was established by state legislation in 2002, adopted the PASER system as the standard, so that different road agencies could compare essentially their conditions, and everybody's using the same scale. Federal aid roads have been rated in the state since 2002, so there's a lot of data on highways, major arterials, et cetera. Local agencies, there was a few that were doing it back then, but not many. But it's really taken hold as the standard operating procedure for all road agencies of any size. About 4 years ago, there was some additional legislation at the state level that required all road agencies with 100 miles of road or more, required them to do an asset management plan. We're expecting that there'll be future legislation that will expand that requirement to smaller agencies. We don't know when that will be or what the cutoff is. But because of that, and because there's so many resources at the state, we recommend that to all our communities, even if they're below that threshold, to utilize the same process. Again, let me go back one. It's a windshield survey, so it's quick, cheap to complete. And it's basically a 1 to 10 rating, with 10 being a new pavement and 1 being a completely failed pavement that's a couple years beyond needing to be replaced. Here's a snapshot of the city. Road condition, I know it's been brought up already. At least a couple people have noticed that Clark and Maple aren't updated on this map. This project was started back in May. So we have since then updated that information with the recently completed construction projects. This is a couple of bar graphs for the major and the local roads. And as was noted earlier on, the average has decreased. Along with that, the percentage of roads in poor condition on both systems has increased, and the percentage of roads in good condition has decreased. The one big reason for that was other than the 2 major reconstruction projects, there was a hold was put on the rest of the paving projects that were potentially scheduled for this season. So that money's still in the bank. We have a strategy. We think that you're going to see a very steep increase in the first couple of years of the program, utilizing the funds for projects that were delayed from this year. Just a little bit about the tools that we have when we're looking at maintaining a road network. And these are more or less organized from less expensive to more expensive. Crack seal is the black snake stuff that you see on the road. That keeps the water out of a otherwise good pavement and delays deterioration from water infiltration, freeze-thaw cycles. Slurry and microsurfacing are thin overlays, less than about 1/8 of an inch thick to a 1/4 inch, depending on how it's applied. That's across the entire surface. That also keeps water out. It delays oxidation from the sun and keeps the pavement from getting brittle and cracking as soon. Chip seal, I'm sure everybody's familiar with this on the more rural roads. Washtenaw County has a very aggressive chip sealing program. I just wanted to point that out. That wasn't included in the strategies for the city because it's typically not a great application in an urban environment. It's dusty. It's more for open ditch rural streets. But there is a version that combines the chip seal with the slurry seal, which can be used in urban environments. That's called a cape seal, so it's a 2-step application. But at the end, you get a smooth surface and no dust. So that previous slide was the much more cost effective treatments as far as bang for your buck, years of life you're buying per dollar per square yard. The next step then is structural, when you get roads that are beyond the point where you can do that and get that return on those less expensive. You get into structural work, and that would be mill and overlay projects, new hot mix asphalt, pulverize and reshape sometimes is an option if you have open ditch or a scenario where you can utilize existing road to make new road base to replace the structural section. And then full reconstruction like you saw on Clark Street and sections of Maple. Those projects are often associated with utility work, other underground work. It's a significant investment. You're putting a pavement down that you expect with proper maintenance to last 20+ years. You don't want to do that on top of infrastructure that's not projected to last that long. So if you have aged water mains, if you have sanitary sewer issues, coordination with gas, if there's gas main work that needs to be done in the corridor. So reconstruction projects typically aren't just a road project. They usually involve other utilities. So historically the city, and it varies depending on the year, but there's roughly between 1.5 and 2.5 million has been invested on capital projects for the road work over the last number of years. There's several different funding sources the city gets for road work, the biggest of which is the gas and weight tax, which is the Act 51. That's distributed by the state quarterly, I think, directly to the finance department. There's the city street millage, the county road millage. The city's share of that is about $225,000. For the purpose of this analysis, the component units, I think as finance calls it, the TIF capture, that again varies. You're only utilizing those funds when in years that you do a project, eligible project in the district. But looking back on what the city has spent for the modeling, we assumed roughly a $300,000 contribution from TIF on average. Now you might be 600 one year and zero the next, but over the life of the model, that's what was assumed. And then about 20,000, I think Metro Act and some other smaller sources. Out of all that revenue, the average annual expenditure on operating expenses, which is salaries, snow removal, salt, basically just keeping the DPW going as it relates to roads, is about $800,000, which leaves, for our purposes, 1.5 for capital improvements out of city sources. In addition to that, the city gets between $500,000 and $600,000 on average every other year of federal aid through Watts. So you add that. Now, again, that can only be spent on roughly that 10 miles, particular roads. So we'll need to program specific projects for that. But the model did include that on every other year. And then finally, as I touched on earlier, because there projects that were programmed for this season were put on hold, there's additional fund balance that's available to be spent down in the early years of the program. So we modeled more than this, but we're presenting 3 scenarios. The first scenario is assuming that the county-wide millage is renewed, which we spoke to the county. They are going to pursue renewal of that millage, that they're very hopeful that it'll pass. So we've continued that contribution from the county millage and also the city millage when it expires in 2008 is the last capture, that would be renewed in the same amount. We also modeled it if neither one of those millages were renewed. And then to sort of tell the story about why asset management is important, we modeled a third scenario, which is scenario 1 funding, so all the millages continuing and basically ignoring asset management principles and just doing road reconstructions. So getting those worst first, bringing those back up to 10, but ignoring the balance of your system. We'll see what that's projecting. So the scenario 1 is an investment a little over $20 million over the next 10 years. And what's important here, I think, to point out is that with the asset management approach, with the mix of fixes, right fix, right time, all that kind of thing, we're touching basically 54 miles of road on a 35-mile road system. So what that's telling you is we're maintaining the roads that we can afford or that we can save for cheap multiple times in that 10-year window, right? So we might crack seal it next year, and we might do a surface seal 4 or 5 years from now. You might crack seal it again 2 or 3 years after that. So that doesn't mean that every road will get touched in 10 years. It means several roads will get touched multiple times. And after the maintenance is done, we're using the balance of the available funds to get those expensive reconstruction projects. So these are the funding scenarios I just explained. They bounce around again because of the federal aid allocation. So this is kind of the story here. So the 3 lines on the graph here, the scenario 3 is $20.6 million invested over 10 years, not doing any maintenance. And you can see that you lose quite a bit of ground. You lose even more ground than the spending $15 million over that 10 years and being selected with the projects. What we're hoping and what we're recommending is that the city, seek to renew the existing city millage. We're hopeful that the county millage will be successful. That actually allows you, and that's not an increase then, if that were just to be renewed, that allows you over the 10 years to gain, so we're at 5.2 now, up to about a 6.6. So you're getting almost a 1.5 point increase on your average Paisley rating with that scenario. And when it comes to setting goals and measuring success, there's two metrics that most communities utilize and ones that we would recommend. You look at the average system condition and you set a goal for that. And then you also look at a threshold that you don't want more than X percent of your system to be in poor condition, to need those expensive. That's really the goal, to keep roads out of that expensive category. So looking at those two metrics with the scenario one, after the first 5 years of the investment at that level, we predict you can get to 90% of the roads in fair or good, which would leave only 10% poor, with an average of 6.6. And then you'll see it, you'll make even more gains at that funding level in the future years of the program. This is a bar graph that essentially illustrates the same thing. The big jump that you get in that first year from between 23 and 24 is in the future years of the program, the maintenance, might be the next slide, yeah. The maintenance work is 5 to 10% of the budget on average after that initial year of spending roughly a third of the budget. So we're seeking to capture, to get all the subdivision streets primarily, is where most of them are, that we can keep from dropping down into that poor category with surface seals and other lower cost activities to get a lot of those fair streets up into the good category and keep them there. So there's just some breakdowns of how that, and what the other thing I guess I wanted to point out here, you look at the percent of the work that you're doing as far as how many residents you're impacting, how many streets you're touching, compared to the proportion of the budget. And this is why if you only do the reconstructs or the heavy rehabilitation, you can spend more money and still lose more ground. So I'll just read the top line here. The PM accounts for 80% of the work, but only 12% of the cost over the life of this model. And the reconstruction is only 20% of the work, but 88% of the cost. So a couple of, and then we can go into questions or discussion. A couple of key takeaways, I guess, that we'd like to leave you with. In my opinion, I do this for a lot of different communities. With the right strategy, you can be in really good shape with maintaining your existing funding structure. If millages aren't renewed, that makes it more challenging. But without any new revenue, so not increasing, just maintaining and renewing millages you have, you can make a lot of good progress. Keeping an average of over 6 with 10% in the poor category is pretty good by all the different communities I've worked with. This is a strategy, so the way the model works, we only will do work on a road if it's the right time to do it. So we won't suggest that you do a thin overlay on a road that is too far gone where it's only going to last a year. So what's important about that is when you actually sit down, we haven't selected specific streets yet. That needs to be done as part of the city's CIP process. But you can't stray too far from the modeled strategy when you actually pick those streets, otherwise you're not going to get the results that are predicted. And then of course we recommend continuing to utilize the Paisley system, use that to log when work's complete, use it to manage that information, and typically every other year or so actually go out and do another field rating. That way you can track your progress, measure success. If you're deviating, it gives you a chance to react, fix that so that you can get to that predicted outcome. So with that, I think I'll take a seat back down if there's Any specific questions? We do have road soft loaded up. We can look at a particular street. Whatever level of detail you'd like to get into, we can do.
Very good. Thank you, Marcus. Engineer Humphries, anything you'd like to add before we open up for questions?
Nope, I think we're ready for questions.
Very good. Well, let me begin very briefly. I won't take up much time because I want to provide ample opportunity for my colleagues to ask questions and raise concerns. Engineer Humphries, remind me, you joined our organization in the waning days of 2021, is that correct?
Yes, I just had my 2-year anniversary.
Very good, congratulations. Thank you. The reason I bring that up is my colleagues may remember that I think it was, well, I know it was my State of the City address in January 2022. There was significant messaging on the benefits of an asset management approach to infrastructure. And while I would have loved to have claimed credit for the language that was in that speech, it was, of course, provided by your office. The point being, I, and I think most of my colleagues, probably all of my colleagues, are firm believers in the benefits of a more asset management-based approach to our infrastructure needs. And the fact that if we follow it and we're committed to it, it will tangibly improve the quality of our infrastructure and thus the quality of life in the Saline community. I do have a couple comments and a couple questions, and if I missed this at the top of the presentation, my apologies. But will we receive an updated PASER rating of all of our major and local streets then after the first of the year that includes the work that was recently done on both Maple and Clark Street?
Yeah, we typically do that every 2 years, but you reran it, right, with the Maple?
Yeah, those construction projects are already in the system. The final draft of the final report will have updated through the end of this year.
But it's logical to make the assertion that based on the quality of execution of those projects, the state of those roads prior to said projects, that the PASER rating will be adjusted upwards with fewer streets in poor and
Yes.
more in good to excellent. Okay. Well, first of all, for my colleagues' benefit, and some of you may recall this, I actually represented cities on the county's working group that first pitched the road millage for Washtenaw County, which was approved and then subsequently reapproved. And I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it came close to winning, I think, in every single precinct in Washtenaw County. I think people see the value in that, especially those serviced by the road commission in our more rural municipalities. So I have every reason to believe that that millage will be approved again by an overwhelming margin when the county seeks renewal. I would be curious at looking at numbers. You may want to go back to this slide. If not, it's not a big deal. But in your 3 scenarios, which was maintaining the status quo, letting those millages expire. Yeah, I'd also be curious as a basis of comparison, Marcus, to see some numbers for an increase in the city's street millage. So what kind of additional dollars would be generated and how could those dollars be successfully earmarked if it were 1.25 mils or 1.5 mils?
We can do that.
I'm not advocating for, I'm not advocating for that, but I think that would be interesting to look at. And I think if we continue on the current trajectory, our citizens and business owners see the value in those dollars. Again, much like the county, that was approved by a sizable margin and then reapproved or reauthorized, renewed by an even larger margin. So if we keep executing quality projects that are visible, I think that the community will see value in that. So just as a basis of comparison, at some point I'd like to see those numbers. We will now transition to comments from my colleagues, and we have ample time. We might have 2 rounds of questions, but we'll at a minimum have 1, and we'll begin with 5 minutes. I'll start to my left and excuse me, I will start to my right and then to my left. So Mr. Kamara-Sulek, you have 5 minutes. Questions for our guests from OHM or for the city engineer?
Yes, thank you. I'll just throw out a couple. So looking at the map of the paved road conditions, I see a lot of Christmas red and not enough Christmas green. But my question is, how do you determine what roads that are, like if you have a red and a green next to one another? I mean, it's pretty clear, like the Wildwood subdivision most of that is red, so it's easy to have a project for those roads. But when you have like smaller areas that are essentially islands of red, do you still go on the passer rating? And how does the asset management work with that?
So, yeah, so the PASER rating basically puts the road in a candidate pool for different types of treatment. That's the model, sort of called the 30,000 foot level, looking at the whole road network. There's always more needs than money in all cases, right? So the model doesn't actually say you should do this to this street. It's just making sure you have enough miles in a candidate pool for a particular treatment. The next step, and what we plan to do after this, after we get your feedback, run maybe some other scenarios, would be, and to take that raw model output and start making recommendations along to staff about how we would group those projects. And that there's a couple different things that come into play with that. One is, just the contractor operational doing enough of a particular type of work to get good pricing, or to get them to even bid on it. You can't, maybe, for example, slurry seal one block. You have to have a big enough contract if you're gonna get somebody in here. So what we do typically, if you have a subdivision that has a lot of different needs, is we put together a bid package that has different levels of repair in it. So for example, if the courts are in really bad shape, you would have probably some full depth asphalt replacement projects there. You'd leave the base alone, but do a full depth. If the main drag is in better shape, we could get away with a mill and fill on that. So we're always seeking to do the right thing or do enough to actually make a good investment, but not overdo it either. We're not gonna, we have a couple of streets that need full, we'll just full depth replace the whole neighborhood. We wouldn't suggest that.
Okay. All right, and do you keep track of like the age of the streets and the traffic counts, along with obviously the conditions, because different roads can deteriorate at different rates?
We do. So the previous city engineer, Jeff, and I think even Gary, actually did a really good job populating the database. It comes with the information the state knows, ownership, and that's about it really. So we have to put in the type of pavement, whether it's asphalt or concrete, you have all asphalt. Number of lanes, we have to put that in there, and then the rating. There's a lot of other fields that, as I mentioned, previous staff have populated, including road widths. That was a request. I know we're going to include a report with the final version that has that information for all the streets that it's in there, and then born on dates too. And as we're continuing to utilize this, we're entering treatment activities. Those come with reset values, right? So if we do this particular thing, we expect it to get this much better, and then it starts to deteriorate again until you do something else. We run analysis based on what the average projected deterioration is, and when a particular street starts to deviate more than we expect, it sets off an alarm, and we look at it. Either it's a good thing, it's lasting a lot longer than we thought it would. So we want to go back and look at that. What was the design cross-section there? Why is it performing better than normal? Or alternatively, if it's fallen off faster than expected, you get an opportunity to get in there before it's too late. And then you can also do the same thing, evaluate, okay, what work was done there, and is that something we should be doing in the future?
Okay. And then is there a standard, so like the repaving, so, Maple and then Old Creek, there are 2 layers is there a certain thickness and density of the asphalt that determines the durability?
Yep. And that's based on the type of street, the traffic that it gets, the amount of commercial traffic that it gets. All those things are evaluated. I guess I didn't mention, Part of this project was taking, I think it was about 80 pavement cores all over town. So we know what we have to work with. So when we get to the next step of actually making specific project recommendations, we have that information, and we're going to be using that along with the traffic count information that's available and just what we know about town, where, you know, delivery routes are and things, to make sure that we're recommending if a pavement doesn't have adequate structure and has a high truck, a lot of truck use, we probably wouldn't be recommending, well, we wouldn't be recommending just to mill and overlay it. We got to, that one we're going to put in the category to say, this pavement is under-designed. Any type of maintenance you do isn't going to last as long as it should.
Right.
So you need to wait on that until we can afford to reconstruct it and put the proper cross-section, stone base, and, you know.
All right. And
Very
what's-
good, gentlemen. I have to stop you there. My apologies, Mr. Commissioner, but we've gone over the 5 minutes. There'll probably be a second round for questions, so hang tight. Mayor Pro Tem Dillon, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you. So I just wanted to just clarify, so our goal is not green. Our goal is yellow, to be mid-range? Like, is green just like pie in the sky? So we're not going to be seeing green?
Yeah, you will see green, but that is only really for the first couple of years after reconstruct. It's very hard to, basically the rule is if you have a transverse crack, which is from curb to curb, more than every 40 feet, can't be any higher than a 7. So that puts it in the fair. So I guess I will point that out too. Don't think about it like a letter grade, like a 6 is a 60%. A 6 is a very good street, and to the general public, a 6, you're not gonna get phone calls on 6s and 5s, and probably not on 4s for the most part either. It's the 1s and 2s and 3s is where the average resident feels like it's an underperforming pavement. So anything in the fair and good category is a street that you and the residents would be happy with.
Thank you. So we sort of started this conversation a while back, and it was when we started first talking about Pazer was when we really started looking at doing a road millage and looking at the condition of our roads back then to where they are now. I know we've done some projects, and our millage has been very successful in being able to do those projects. But what I'm wondering right now is, and this might be a more holistic approach of understanding, I understand what you had just said about tying infrastructure to roads and such so that you're only tearing up a road once. I think that we need to be very mindful of that in that, I mean, right now I will say roads like, and I've talked about this for years, Austin Drive, North Lewis, both of those roads, I believe, are categorized as failed. I know Austin is way beyond its life expectancy. And it hasn't been done because it needs other things to go along with it. It's not just a road. And we don't seem to be able to connect the dots to be able to get there. So is this process now going to help us be in a better place? Because it doesn't necessarily look like what we're doing is addressing the worst roads, you know, first. And so kind of understanding what that process looks like.
Do you want to take that one?
So I think as far as the worst first, and that's I think one of the reasons why our Pazer rating has decreased a little bit over the last couple of years is because we have been doing these major reconstruction projects and not investing in the right fix at the right time earlier on in the Pazer rating schedule. Austin, I believe, was done. I was just going to see that, and I'm just trying to see when the last time Austin, because there was a...
Austin Road was done, Austin Drive was not.
Oh, Austin Drive, yes, and you're absolutely, okay, no, that makes more sense to me now what you're talking about. Because I was like, Austin Road wasn't that long ago that we were there on Austin, but Austin Drive, absolutely, that's a smaller, and Lewis is another good example of a residential street. So I believe both of those are probably local streets, and so we do have a lot more funding in general for our major roads than our local streets. And that beginning slide, we talked a little bit about the breakdown of our streets. So we have more miles of local, but less funding for local. And one of the things I found very interesting about this exercise, because I am relatively new to road ownership, right? I have a lot of background in utilities, but the road ownership ownership side of it, we actually don't get enough money from the state to even maintain our local roads. So we're in the deficit with our local roads from the start. And if you actually break up our PASER ratings between our major and our locals, our majors are up here and our locals are much lower. And so I think that's something that's one of the reasons why my understanding, the millage was passed, so we can get to some of those locals. And we did touch a lot of local roads before I started. In 2020, we did the Hillcrest, the Highland, the Watson, all of the Nichols, a lot of local residential streets. And we were able to bring those failing roads up to brand-new roads. And part of this plan is to make some of that money go even further in spending that money on maintaining those local roads before they completely fail. So we do have, in this plan, there is what you called the catalog of recommended improvements. So for some of those local streets, I envision that we're going to have more needs than we have available for reconstruction, but that's something that we all get to decide as part of the capital improvement plan that we're developing.
Can I add one thing to that?
Yes, please.
So the other, I think, challenge, as Tesha mentioned, you get a lot more money for major roads than locals from the Act 51 in the state. And you're limited by law from transferring more than 25% of the major road into the local fund to help with both operations and capital. One of the advantages of having an approved asset management plan is there is no restriction on how much money you can move as long as you're following your plan. So that gives finance and engineer and DPW a lot more flexibility to tackle some of those expensive local streets. As Austin Drive might be one example of that.
Well, I appreciate that, thank you.
We got to move on, Mayor Pro Tem Dillon, my apologies. Hang tight, there might be time for another round of questions. Mr. Gearbow, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Well, you mentioned in this plan that 25% of the failed streets would be rebuilt. Do we only have 20% of our inventory that needs to be rebuilt, or do we have like 40 or 50% that needs to be rebuilt? It's in one of your slides.
Yeah, I'm looking for it, make sure I don't misspeak.
Because when we look at it, I'm just concerned that there's a number 3 or lower roads that a 20% budget isn't necessarily going to fix the majority of the roads that I have failed.
No, so there's 39% of the total city network is in poor condition currently, and we're projecting at the end of so you'd hit basically 20% of those, bring those 20% of those of the system from poor to good over that 5 years. And the maintenance, the preventative maintenance, the reason the program is we're recommending so much in the preventative maintenance in that first year is to keep all the roads that are on the edge from going down to poor. So we'll continue to do that maintenance to keep it, those roads from getting worse. And then, yes, the balance of the funds will be utilized for heavy rehab and construction projects. So it would reduce the percentage of the network in poor condition by about 20% over that 5 years.
But primarily, the funding, the preventative maintenance is going to go towards roads that are either green or yellow. I'm just going to use the colors at
Yes,
this point.
that's correct.
Right. When we talk about mill and fill and some of the other terminology and reconstruct, are those interchangeable, or are they lesser, or how are we looking at that?
Mill and fill is lesser, so you can go different thicknesses, but typically it's at least 1.5 inches, because that's about the thinnest you can put the asphalt back, 1.5 inch lift. So if you have a road that's in pretty good condition, say a PASER rating 6, would be a good candidate for like 1.5 inch mill and fill on a neighborhood street. If it's a 5 and you have enough structure there to support the construction activity, you might go to a 2 or 2.5 inch mill and overlay, mill and fill. Once it gets down to a 4, not all 4s are created equal. There can be different reasons that a road is rated a 4. But there may be some cases where we could get away with spot repairs, full depth spot repairs, and then a mill and overlay of the whole thing. So that is the next step when we're actually making specific street recommendations. We customize exactly what we're doing to make sure we're dealing with the structural issues, but also not spending more money than we have to get the road back.
And that's not considered part of the capital preventative maintenance program, mill and fill and reconstruction are not part of that?
Correct.
I'm looking at these four.
You could consider that, I would say you could consider the 1.5 inch mill and overlay as part of preventative maintenance, but anything beyond that would be more rehabilitation.
And then just looking at your numbers, you'd mentioned $20 million approximately for this plan. When I'm looking at, we commit $1.5 million, 1.57 every year for 10 years, and then another $550,000 every other year from federal resources. I kind of get a number of 13 million. Where's the other 7 million come from?
Well, we're front-loading the program for one.
I mean, 2 million, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so if you go to slide.
Is that more inflation money or?
So there's two inflationary, go back. So there's two inflationary considerations in the model. One is cost inflation,
Okay.
but the other is capture inflation, increased taxable value over that 10 years does have an impact. And then also there is, it's front-loaded with spending down existing fund balance in the road fund currently.
And then last question for right now. So we talked about correlating with other infrastructure as we talked. Do we have funds to do that? We talk about we have funds to do the roads here, sort of. But do we have the funds to do the other side of it? Because we know we need more water sewer funds and.
Well, and we're still in as far as asset management, the first step is figuring out inventory of what you have. The second step would be doing a condition assessment and figuring out the condition or the level of service that we're providing with the infrastructure that we have. So one of the things that we recently authorized and we're getting ready to implement this coming winter is a full inspection of all of our sanitary sewers in the West Belt sanitary sewer trunk line, or not the whole entire West Belt collection system. So once we have actually identified the existing condition of all of our assets, that's how we can then start to mingle or merge the projects that make the most sense. I think one of the things that's very clear on our current PASER map that's included in your packet, if you look at Maple, the East Belt sanitary sewer project, Maple Road was red north of 12, but Old Creek was green. But we just tore that up for a sanitary sewer, needed sanitary sewer project. And so we want to avoid those types of things in the future. But the first step is getting a level of service and a condition assessment on all of our assets. And as part of the 2019 asset management plans that were done with the SAW grant money, we only televised 10% of our sewer system. So we have the money and the funding set aside in this budget, this current fiscal year and next fiscal year, to do 100% of our sanitary sewer system. And so that's the process that we're following with all of our, so then we also have storm sewer, we also have water main, so that same process will be followed, and all of those plans will then get merged together to help get in this true asset management-based capital improvement plan that we're going for.
Be within the next year?
The sanitary sewer, we have most of that programmed in this, we're going to get a lot of that done actually this winter. But we're looking for the next 2 years to kind of get this level of service condition assessment on our essential assets.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gearba. That was 5 minutes. Mr. Delorco, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you. I want to go back to the 40% number of roads that need to be addressed. What percentage of that is the local roads and not the major streets? Does it make up the bulk of it?
Yeah, so I think, let me just go to the slide. So here's the bar chart to the right on each of these graphs is the 2023, so the current condition, with a minor adjustment for Maple and Clark needed, as we discussed. So you'll see about 22% currently of the major streets are in poor, and over 40 of the locals. So it is, and you have more mileage of locals. So I can get those exact figures.
No, but that
for
gives
you.
me an idea. So
Yeah.
I'm trying to understand, it seems like our biggest problem is the subdivisions. Is that because those roads receive the least attention over time, or is it and other roads take higher priority? Because they're the least traveled, so do they just go the longest without attention?
I think that's probably true. You know, major streets, because they are majors, they get more attention, they get more truck traffic. They typically are built with a beefier cross-section to handle that loading. And if they're, and there's other funding mechanisms. And so those, federal aid being one of them, ARPA money, you know, ARPA money and ARA money back in '08 could only be used on federal aid eligible roads for this. So there's just a lot more opportunity for funding. So the majors, every system I've dealt with, the major roads are in better condition than locals.
But to your earlier point, if we were to put this plan in place, that would enable us to use some of those Act 51 dollars for local streets.
That's correct.
Because my understanding with the millage was, when we had those discussions, was the millage was designed to address the deficiency between what we could support with federal funding and what we couldn't. And it sounded like you stated earlier that if we did absolutely nothing other than renew the millages, that could get us to a place where we move the average from 5.2% to the 6.6. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so that's encouraging. That is very encouraging news to me. But to the mayor's earlier point, it would be interesting to see if we were to adjust those numbers in any way, what kind of impact that might have on our ability to address deficiencies in the neighborhoods. Because these are the areas where you're going to receive a lot of complaints. People are paying taxes. They want to be able to not have failing roads in their neighborhoods.
Yep, and I'm happy to, I mean, the hard work's been done, everything's set up, so running another model scenario is easy to do. And we can do that. The nice thing is the requirements really at the state level for the asset management plan doesn't dictate that you necessarily know for sure whether or not a millage will be renewed
Right.
or maybe increased. What the statutory requirement is to basically to have the strategy. So if everybody's agreeing on the strategy, then there's a decision at some point. Do we pursue a millage renewal? Do we go look for an increase? Whichever direction you go, you're still going to be utilizing the same strategy to manage your system with whatever level of funding you have.
Well, it sounds like it functions a lot like our master plan would for the city.
Yes.
And giving us the flexibility to use federal dollars on addressing those local road deficiencies is a big step in the right direction. So thank you for sharing that.
Nothing else, Mr. Delorco?
Nothing further.
Very good. Councilmember Rice, you have 5 minutes.
Thanks so much. I feel like that I've been saying this a lot since I became a counselor in January this year. I'm so impressed at the efficiency and expediency in which we are getting ourselves up to date with things like asset management plans, things like that. As a resident, it's a little jarring that we didn't have these things in place beforehand, but I appreciate all of these efforts. I think these are really important to explain to the community that as we move forward with these things, such as having the plan allows us to use federal funding in a different manner. But, communicating these things with the community, I think, is really important. In that, one question that I have is if perhaps we could get a map that specifically calls out which are the major roadways. I could probably do it in my head, but I think it would be really helpful to discuss with our community when they say, my road is such and such, then we can, have those conversations with folks. Second to that, and this is probably a question for Tesha, when we talk about these roads and we look in the neighborhoods and we think about things like street sweeping and we think about clearing snow in the winter as we have a lot of these extreme weather events, what are these reds doing to the condition of our equipment? Are we having any significant issues with being able to keep up with services because of the condition of some of these roads in these neighborhoods?
Well, I do think that is part of the operating expense. So like filling in potholes, for instance, that is a line item in our general ledger in our fund of road balances that goes into both local and major roads. So that is an expense that we take on because of the road condition. As far as damage to plows and such, I don't know that any of our roads are in that shape that it's actually damaging. And we do have heavy duty plow, I don't know how many plows we own, 4 or 5. Larry would have a better answer for those questions. But I think but I'm certain there probably are damages that occur. So there is probably some ongoing annual expenses that we incur because the conditions of the roads are poor.
And this sort of stems from a scenario we had during last winter where we had done the, what'd you call the snake fill?
Crack
Crack seal, yeah,
Crack seal on
over
North Ann
Banyan.
Arbor Street, a plow came through and all of that crack seal was in our front yards.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just thinking about these things that the community is seeing and all of these attempts to get ourselves back into a good condition through all of these different strategies and just communicating with the community that it's not putting a Band-Aid on something, it's doing preventative maintenance. It's not, we're not just filling a crack because we see one, we're filling a crack so that water in the winter doesn't get in there and create more of a problem. There's a lot of communication issues, I think, that having this asset management plan will allow us to do with the community. So I would like to start seeing some of that as well as we get some of these, final, assessments in hand, and we can start talking to the community about roads and how things like that work. Is there any plan in this, Tesha, after we get this done, to have some conversations with specific neighborhoods when they see these and they see that their entire neighborhood is red? Discuss with them sort of what your plan is. I know you haven't done an initial, like, this is the first road we're gonna hit kind of a plan yet.
Right, and I do think as far as the overall overhauling of our capital improvement projects, increasing the public engagement phase is something that has been identified by engineering, and increasing that phase to reach out to people in neighborhoods 2 years before. I mean, we should be bidding a project, in the fall before we want to build it that following summer to get the best bid prices, to get the best completed project at the end of the year. But a year before that is when we should be talking to everybody in the neighborhoods that we're touching. So, and that's why we do have, like this, we have not bid out any projects this current year. We obviously have a large wastewater treatment plant rehabilitation projects. We've got money going out the door for capital, but nothing that most of the residents are not going to see. We're anticipating that we will touch a lot of projects this coming year because of these preventative maintenance types things are not the major projects that need major engineering, need all this time to bid out. So some of that public engagement will just be quick. We're going to be coming here, we're going to be doing this fix on, but these aren't the people that have the failing roads. These are the people that are in the better roads. So we'll hit a lot this coming summer, but I think as we identify with our capital improvement plan this winter is when we can start that public engagement phase following that. And I completely agree with you that increasing the length of that, increasing the communication with residents, just when they know what to expect. Road construction is disruptive, and nobody likes when their road is in bad shape, and also nobody likes it when it's actually being constructed because it's just a pain. But if they know it's coming and they know why, they're much happier about it and accepting of it.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think this whole plan is gonna make that so much easier.
Yes, I agree.
I think so. Helpful. Thank you.
Perfect. That was just about 5 minutes, Councilmember Rice. Couple questions for, Engineer Humphreys and perhaps the city manager as well. So what are the next steps subsequent to tonight's meeting? Obviously, there were a few questions and comments made and some additional data points requested, but where do we go from here? Do you anticipate a subsequent work meeting or discussion after the first of the year?
Yes, so the idea is to take general support, which I'm hearing, is to take each of our I forget how you categories, and so each category will have, these roads fall into this category, so we will have more needs than we have funding. So then we have to make the decisions on what roads we are moving forward with in the next 5-year capital improvement plan.
Okay, very good. So maybe we can commit to engaging again on this subject shortly after the first of the year. Okay. And then I would make an ask of the city manager. We have one council member-elect in the audience this evening, one who may be watching at home but isn't here personally, and then a council member who is absent. So this is a very timely, important matter. So if your office could please connect with them and make sure to address any questions, concerns that they have. We want to be able to move forward in a thoughtful but in an expeditious manner after the first of the year. Marcus, Tesha, anything else you'd like to add before we conclude? Are there any pertinent last-minute questions before we adjourn? I'll give it to Mr. Gearbaugh.
Just real quick, when we look at these maintenance options, and so like chip seal and some of these other ones, like with stones, does that work better on roads that are more heavily trafficked than, say, to do it in a neighborhood? Because of the way that it works. So there's going to be certain applications that don't work in certain situations, correct?
That's absolutely true. And the chip sealing itself is on the list, but it's unlikely. That's usually done with roads that have ditches. So we have almost all of our roads are curbed, right? Maybe a little bit of ditch on Willis, but overall, all of our roads are curbed. So that particular is not a great application for our road network. But there is different, yes, depending on the urban versus rural environment, there are different fixes that are better.
Okay, and then your recommendation on potholes, that we should be filling every pothole we have regardless of size, correct?
As far as,
It's
you mean as
preventative
far as,
maintenance.
is that part of, that is part of maintenance we do in-house, is pothole
Right,
filling.
right. But we should be doing that to make sure that the roads don't progressively get worse, correct?
Yeah, and that's the big key. I mean, that's, yeah, keeping the water out from underneath the base of the road helps.
All right, and then just lastly, when the two of my colleagues have mentioned about increasing in, millage potentially, we haven't looked at necessarily general funds, and we already know that we have opportunity costs there that are being used for other purposes. So potentially there are some general fund dollars. We just have to figure out how to better fund other opportunities. So thank you. Good.
If there's nothing further, then appreciate your time, Marcus. Tasha, thank you for your lead on this. The chair would entertain a motion to adjourn the work meeting at 6:59 PM.
So moved.
Moved by Gearboss, seconded by Kamara Sulak. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. We will reconvene into regular session in 2 minutes. one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we welcome those of you who are in the audience. We'd encourage you to sign in, sign in sheets on the back table. There are copies of the agenda on the back table along with hearing devices if you require them. Members present this evening are council members Camara Sulak, Del Orco, Gearbaugh, Rice, Mayor Pro Tem Dillon, and Mayor Marl. From city staff, we have City Manager O'Toole and Clerk Royal. DPW Director Searles will not be with us this evening. We did have an agenda distributed last Wednesday. There was something added to it, and then Clerk Royal, I believe, we're back to the original agenda, which was distributed on Wednesday afternoon. Okay, so a motion to approve the agenda as submitted would be in order unless there are changes.
So moved.
Moved by Camara Sulak, seconded by Dillon to approve the agenda as submitted. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. Is there a motion now to excuse the absence of our colleague, Mr. Seo? Moved by Gearbaugh. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Dillon again. All those in favor of excusing the absence signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. We come now to the first public comment period, and this will be limited to agenda items. Under the Open Meetings Act, any person may come forward at this time, make comment or question on an item that appears on this agenda. Comments will be limited to 3 minutes per person. Anyone who would like to speak is requested but not required to state his or her name and address for the record.
Good evening. Changming Fan, local social entrepreneur. First, I really have to say it's sad that our wonderful friends, leader, two of you, will not going to be serve us next year. Mr. Hard time to pronounce.
Camara Sulak.
Mayor, you're famous. That's too famous. I'm so scared. And Jim, I just want to say one thing is that you guys are so good, contributed hugely, but I have some comments. I hope tonight I can say something. Don't take it personally, but take it seriously. Before that, I'd like to give comments about the last information on the PDF file list about the announcement will be voted, which is extended 12 days to 18 days of the special meeting notice. That you can look at it in the PDF file, which is wonderful. I agree. But Houston, we have problems, and the problem is media. So SALT initiative, which is I promoted to you, their money functions, money benefit, two things. One is communication, news, dissemination use new media called SALT. On top of that, there's a ring of tax. It's huge. How to do that? We have to work together. Second thing is energy generation. I will talk in a second public meeting, but first, let's get back to that things. We have communication problem. The middle class worldwide, especially in US, couldn't get the basic information unless used on your screen. How many people will check that? How many people will see the Christmas light without have to get online screen-based communication? Mr. Mayor, you remember, 2018, I make a speech about SALT initiative. I said, this is the way we change the way we communicate. That is the air-based communication based on the new structure called Saline Area Light Tower, or which is ALT, Area Light Tower. If in Saline this new initiative is too new. That's another thing which is, I want to thank Mr. Jim Delcor, support me, gave a lot of support, and has several meetings right here. But last time we sit down and talk, Mr. Jim bring the big book. That is something like 1975 kind of like book of the regulation about LED in public. So the problem we have here is we have huge amount of technology, mostly high tech. We want to meet tech like SALT initiative. I will talk in the second part of my 3 minutes.
Thank you, Changming. Appreciate the comments. Are there any additional citizen comments on agenda items? Again, your comments will be limited to items that are enumerated on tonight's agenda. You'll have a second opportunity to speak at the end of tonight's meeting, and you can discuss or address whatever it is you'd like to discuss. Appears to be no more comments from those in the audience. Clerk Royal, did we receive any written comments in advance of tonight's meeting in which the individual wanted their remarks read at this time? Easy enough. Then we'll transition to the one and only presentation of the evening, which is pump station modernization. Mr. Rubel, we welcome you this evening. Please approach the podium. Make sure the green light is illuminated at the base of the microphone, and your PowerPoint presentation should be up on all 4 screens.
Well, thank you. Good evening. This is an opportunity that we don't get very often. I've completed a number of projects for you through the years, but very rarely have we talked about the performance of the project at the end, or maybe more specifically the value that the project is bringing. So I'm fortunate to have the opportunity to do that tonight because I think we have something to feel good about. So, and no project is completed without the assistance of your staff throughout. And I made a list here, and I think we touched upon a good percentage of your staff here throughout the project, including folks like Mr. Schank and others who perhaps don't often get to talk. And I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that the project actually started about 2.5 years ago. And Mr. Fordyce and Mr. Fetchick contributed quite a bit to the shape of the project, and they are no longer in your employment, but they were significant players as well as your current staff. This project, although we called it the Pump Modernization Project, also touched upon your water system and several facilities, and those squares represented there are all the places that work was performed throughout the city. Is it 3 or 4 pump stations for the sanitary sewer, the water plant, the wastewater plant, and 2 or 3 remote water facilities, primarily the elevated tanks, had equipment that was replaced. And I'll talk a little bit about that, but we covered a pretty good cross-section here of the city. The background, in 2020, the asset management plan identified needs, condition needs primarily at most of your pump stations. And that kind of set a foundation for the project, but what really got it kick-started was a request by American Soy to increase the purchase of water and thus the discharge of sanitary sewage, which caused us to look at the Woodland pump station much closer than I recall it have ever been looked at before. And we identified that the pump station already was over capacity. And in particular, there were 2 pumps there. And good practice is to only call for 1 pump to operate so that you always have 1 in standby. As you have to remove a pump occasionally to maintain it, you always want to be able to do that and still have the pump remaining. And in particular, that pump station was calling for 2 pumps to run, I would say almost every day. And so it was a very dangerous type situation if one of the pumps went down. So we, although American Soy, I think, pulled their request to add flow, it certainly brought attention to the need to do something with that pump station as it stands right now. So in the summer of 2021, we started looking and designing the project. We awarded the construction contract in early 2022. We did a small amount of work. Most of it was ordering the equipment, and then we found out the city had qualified for a federal grant, $599,000. So the grant required us to pause the project while some environmental clearances were occurring. So we paused the project for 6 months. We restarted it right about a year ago. It was right before the holiday last year that we were able to restart it. We had the clearances in place. So in the last 12 months, we've almost finished it up. I'm going to talk briefly about supervisory control and data acquisition. That acronym SCADA just means the communication, the remote communication with the pump stations and the water facilities. We really enhanced that on this project. We went from really 1980s technology with using phones to call out when there was a problem to modern technology where we really have a computer now in each of those stations, and it's really part of the city's computer network now, and that brings benefits in technology as well. To go through some of the bullets, the city had previously used a vendor to provide cell communication for the elevated tanks, and we determined that really wasn't very secure from a malicious standpoint if somebody wanted to cause a problem. So the project, and Mr. Schank led this, is to get the city purchased their own communication through Verizon, which has much higher security with it. So we've added kind of hardened the system from outside actions. The Southside Pump Station on South Ann Arbor Street had lost its communication altogether a few years ago. It had used radios, so the only way to know there was a problem there was a red light would come on at the top of the control panel. It really relied on somebody driving by and seeing the light and reporting it. Now we have, through that SCADA system, communication where it can communicate back to the plant and say, hey, there's a problem here. And then a phone call will be made to the operator if it's after hours. So we've really improved that. The water plant and the wastewater treatment plant didn't communicate, and Mr. Schank has now pulled a leased fiber line to the wastewater plant. So now the operators will soon be able to see each plant from the other plant. And although that isn't quite connected yet, we're going to finish that connection with the larger plant project. So, but the bones are there now to make that happen. We've improved the ability to just monitor these stations, although going to the stations is still good practice for your operators. They can see what's going on now at the station while they're at the wastewater plant. So they'll have a good idea of what they're going to encounter before they go, and will make the trips much more valuable. And some of your stations did have these what we call PLCs, or industrial computers. And in particular, the water tanks had that, and the water plant had that. And these PLCs were 20 years old, and you can imagine using a computer at home that's 20 years old. We were concerned they were no longer supported by the vendor, the equipment manufacturer. So if something had happened, we really would have had to purchase the new one and got it fixed on the fly as opposed to just a repair. So we have swapped those out, and now those are all state-of-the-art, brand new models on all of that. This graphic actually represents now what the operators see at the pump stations. It's a computer screen. They go out there and they can monitor all sorts of systems at the pump station. They can monitor the levels. They get reports on power outages and losses of phases of the power. They get a status of the generator. Is it running, not running? They have 2 devices now that control the level. The level controls when the pumps come on and off. Now we have 2. So if one fails, we've got a second one there just for reliability purposes. And they can toggle between the 2. If one is out for service, the other one will take over. So graphically, it's quite an improvement. We actually added a lot of logic as well to some of these. So if, for instance, in one day the station operates more than 30 or 40% over the running average, it will send an alarm that something different is going on and we should look at it. In many cases, that just means the pump is getting plugged up. It runs more. But again, it gives some diagnostics of what's going on here. Some examples, the Southside Pump Station, again on South Ann Arbor Street over by Wilderness Park. You had 2 pumps in there before. There was a slot for a third pump. We added that third pump because the flow projections show that at times it will need to call in a second pump. We didn't have any records of that, but the calculation showed that nonetheless. So now we have a third pump. So the second pump comes on, we've got the third one there. It now communicates to the wastewater plant. So although there is still that red light there, that's just backup. It will communicate. And we added a lot of safety improvements to the project. In particular, this photo shows a safety grading that's put in. So an operator who's there will not fall in accidentally if he were to make a misstep. And there's also a place where tie-offs that we put in where they can wear a harness and then tie themselves off so that they can't physically fall down. The tether will keep them from falling. Those were not there before. Now they are and will help improve the safety of the operations. Maplewood Pump Station is on North Maple by the new development. It's on the west side of the road. It was built in 1988, and it largely had not been improved since 1988. There was corrosion of the pipes. The pumps were in need of replacement. The controls, the panel that sits above ground that tells the pumps to turn on and off, those controls actually, through miswiring or something, you could not operate one pump. The controls either turned both of the pumps on or none of the pumps. So it was really on its last legs, those controls. There was not any backup power there. The city could take a generator on a trailer and hook it up, and as part of the development, those good people purchased a generator. That was part of the agreement to develop. That is mostly in. We still are waiting the gas to be hooked up for that generator to work, but we're 90% there at this point. There's also what we call bypass pump connections there. So if the pumps get plugged for some reason, the city has pumps on a trailer. They can take that out, and there's quick connections now around the permanent pumps. So in a matter of minutes, the DPW staff or the plant staff could have bypass around the pumps and keep that station in operation while they're doing a repair. So we've added that, and I can show you a picture of that. And we've added those same safety improvements that I've talked about. This is the Maplewood pump station of a few weeks ago. The generator is the rectangular object in the back. The new control panel is on the left side there. There is a red light, like I mentioned before, that indicates if there is an alarm, but more importantly, that will alarm back to the treatment plant and actually phone the operators if it's after hours. The circular object is the wet well, and at the time the bypass pump was running, you can see that above ground elbow there is the emergency connection. And that will come back around and discharge really in the foreground of that picture. The rectangular object is a vault for valves to operate, turn off a line if need be and service the equipment. So still a little bit of work there to do. There'll be grass seeding and so forth that's done next spring. It's been seeded, but it'll have to be inspected and probably corrected a little bit in the spring to get it going. The Woodland Pump Station is really what kind of started this in Industrial Park. It's right in front of the Norgren industry on the curve of the road. I already talked about the pumps. We had 2 smaller pumps. Now we have 2 larger pumps. We have a larger wet well. We've installed a permanent generator there. It didn't have a permanent generator before. Interesting thing about this pump station is the control panel was over 100 feet away from the wet well. So when the operators were there servicing it before, they would have to walk to the control panel, flip a switch, walk 100 feet, look down a hole and see if it worked. Now we have the control panel about 5 feet from the wet well, so they can literally operate the control panel and be looking down the hole and see if it's working at this point. We've also added those bypass connections like we did at Maplewood, and the safety improvements have been added as well. Here, the valve vault was very deep and required the operators to actually climb down a ladder in a confined space and walk horizontally to operate the valves. We've added valve operators up to the ground surface, so now they can operate, the vault's still there and they can still enter it, but now they can operate these valves from the ground surface and not have to make the confined space entries, which should be a safer way to operate as well. So this is the Woodland Pump Station. The circular concrete is, again, the wet well. That's where the sewage collects. That's where the pumps are. This elbow, again, is the emergency connection. And then it goes around the valves to the second elbow, which is then where it discharges back into the force main. In the foreground is the control panel, and the generator is on the other side of the driveway. So Again, there's quite a bit of restoration work here. The grass did not take off this fall, so they will be back to monitor that in the spring. And we also have it in a list for them to regrade that a little bit. They left it a little high, so we just need to improve the drainage a little bit around that facility. Other improvements, I mentioned it briefly at the beginning, these PLCs, these industrial computers were replaced at the water facilities. So you have modern equipment, can be serviced at any time, very reliable. At Arboretum, in the southeast part of the city, we replaced those pumps, and we also did the same safety improvements there so that the operators meet codes and are safe when they do their work. Few things left to do. We create a punch list as part of a construction project for the contractor to clean up, finish some odds and ends. They are still working on that list. They will continue probably into January. We'll keep the contract open till the spring to make sure the grass grows. It's visually a good looking site when they're done. Also, I only talked about 3 or 4 wastewater pump stations at this project, but we have programmed the same improvements into the other pump stations. The city owns 7 pump stations as part of the wastewater project. So the same things we talked about here, you'll be getting in about a year. I think I saw their schedule. Early 2025, they'll be finished with that. Another thing we can talk about, and I haven't talked to staff about it, is now that we have this technology in place, we can do lots of interesting things with it. We could actually set it up so that the stations can be monitored and even controlled by cell phones. Again, I don't know if your staff want that, but that is an option out there for us to think about so that your staff, if they're out on call, don't have to physically be at home. They can be out doing something else and still monitoring your system. And as I mentioned, and we're going to do that as part of the wastewater project, is we'll get the water plant and the wastewater plant systems connected so that staff can operate one from the other. Right now, they physically have to drive to do that. The benefits, you have modern pump stations. That was the name of the project. That's what we've achieved. These PLCs being updated is very important. They're now serviceable, supported by the vendor. You have backup generators at all the pump stations now, so you don't have to worry about pulling that trailer to these. We've replaced pipes, pumps, controls. Again, you now have set these up for a decade or more of reliable service. And safety, number one, is what we've improved. The reliability with having new pumps and these controls. We've assisted in protecting personal property from backups, which could always happen, but I think those reliability improvements have addressed that. Protected the environment, the cybersecurity improvements that we made, and the efficiency for your staff. It just makes life quite a bit easier for them. So I would be remiss if I didn't thank you for the opportunity to serve the city on this. We feel very good about what we've accomplished, and we're 90–95% there to get this wrapped up here this spring. So thank you very much.
Very good. This was very helpful, Mr. Rubel, and I would make an ask of the city manager. I hope that we can follow this approach in the future. We talk a lot about projects on the front end, but we don't always debrief and provide for council and the community a synopsis of the project upon completion. So that was very beneficial, at least from my perspective. I have one comment, or 2 comments, and then a question, or concern rather. I appreciate you beginning the presentation tonight, Mr. Rubel, acknowledging all of the current and former staff who assisted with these initiatives. And on behalf of myself and my colleagues, we thank them for their dedication and their input. I do feel compelled. I'd like to be fair and objective and reasonable to acknowledge the nearly $600,000 direct appropriation we received from the federal government that came via our former congressperson, Tim Walberg, who's a friend, although I'll indicate Mr. Walberg and I don't agree on anything, actually. But his staff was gracious enough to advance that request. And I would note, too, that in that particular funding round, only 3 projects were funded in the old 7th Congressional District, one in Lenawee County, one in Jackson, and then the $600,000, or nearly $600,000 in Saline. So that was great to receive that kind of federal support, and our advocacy will continue as we try to leverage additional dollars to complete important projects in the Saline community. I'd also indicate that that request probably wouldn't have been successful had we not had local businesses step up to the plate and write letters and communicate to his office in support of that request. My concern and my question, and I believe it was initially addressed via an email by my colleague Mayor Pro Tem Dillon. As we look at the lift station along Woodland Drive, when we begin additional restoration work in the spring, do we plan on putting any kind of barrier around that technology? Because, boy, there's a lot of jogs as you drive on Woodland, and I don't wish it to happen, and it probably won't, but I could see somebody being inebriated, I could see an inclement weather event, I could see somebody having a medical emergency and a vehicle colliding with that equipment, which would be potentially devastating.
That's an excellent question. That is on the contractor's list to complete. There are bollards, yellow steel posts that will protect that control panel from an errant vehicle. So that will happen over the winter here.
Okay. I guess the only other comment that I would make is, and this doesn't require an answer tonight, but as you look at our other lift stations or infrastructure more broadly in the Saline community, if there are additional steps that we can take to protect it, such as how you just described some work or some forthcoming work that will be done for our Woodland pump station, I would very much be in support of that. So please don't hesitate to bring that to either council's attention or to staff's. Thank you, Mr. Raboul. Again, we'll start to my right and to my left. Councilmember Camarillo, like any comments for our guests this evening?
Yes, I do. Thank you for the presentation. It was very enlightening and really is a good example of the timetable of from, starting a project to completing it and then seeing that there's more to be done. And I agree with protecting those pump stations. And the one on Willis Road, that's a south side pump station, right? There's like a gravel parking or gravel area there, and some people do park there sometimes. Is there any risk of damage to that pump station or control panel?
Everything is secure there, locked there. But if somebody wanted to do harm, they could do harm. But it would take an intentional act to do it.
Okay, all right. And then what is the life expectancy of these pumps and the major components? I know the safety and a lot of the other items are not as crucial as the actual pumps and.
Yeah, a wastewater pump like that, you would expect to get 10 to 20 years of life out of it. Other components there, the control panel, the majority of the components would last that same 20 years or longer. The panel itself, the enclosure, should last well beyond that. Some of the instruments in there, they are electronic. We all have experience with electronics, but generally you'll get 10 plus years out of most of them. And most of them, if they fail, would be a nominal swap of lower end cost type of a thing, and you would just do it as need arised. So,
okay. And I think you addressed this in your presentation, but so our staff with this new newer technology and bringing things up to the 2023 standards, they know how to troubleshoot and how to operate all of the electronics and newer components.
Yes, we had a number of training sessions. We had one specifically focused on what I'll call the SCADA, the computer screens. There was a second one on just the pumps themselves. So they have been trained. My staff certainly understand all of those pieces, and I'm more than happy to do any refreshers that are needed. There are also O&M manuals that each of the vendors provide and do a very thorough job of explaining both how to operate the equipment, but equally important, how to maintain it.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Commander-Sulek. Councilmember Mayor Pro Tem Dillon, any questions or comments for our guest or staff?
Thank you. I have just a couple of quick questions. Thank you for bringing up about fencing barriers. At the Maplewood station, there was fencing there originally, and now there's sort of partial fencing. Will that be enclosed again, or is it just going to be more open air? Do we know?
Now, I will have to defer to your staff. I believe the direction, we did speak about that. I believe the direction that they provided was they would prefer there not be any enclosure at that. And I think that has to do with just maintaining that equipment requires large vehicles to be there and, you know, bring a Vector truck in to clean out the wet well, to bring a service truck in to pull a pump, just requires a fair amount of unconfined space. So I believe that's the direction we're going.
I appreciate that. I want to talk about the pump station and the safety improvements. The same safety improvements were put at every pump station, so they all have the same standard of safety now at the ones that have been worked on so far?
That is correct. They meet the current occupational and health safety codes, yes.
Fantastic. Moving on to generators. Are there now generators at all of the pump stations?
I believe there are. I'm trying to think of Huntington Woods, south of the plant there. I just don't remember. That might be an exclusion.
Yes, there is.
Huntington Woods does have a generator.
Okay.
I believe we're still waiting on the gas line for the one on Maplewood, though.
That is
Okay, but are all of them now direct fuel source, so they don't have to go manually start them or anything like that? Are they all?
The ones in this project, I believe, yes.
That is correct.
Okay.
They run on natural gas, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So, two last questions. One is, I like the new technology of cell phone service, but cell phone service can be unreliable at times.
Yes.
So what does that process look like if the Verizon lines are down?
You did have cell phone service previously with the water system, so that's just a second-party cell transferred to city cell. The pump stations had a landline telephone. Now they have a cell phone connection. There is a delay at the plant. We'll go several minutes before anything happens, but if we lose cell phone coverage, their alarm will be made to the operators that communication has been lost, and we should look at what's going on here.
Okay, that's good to know, because I know that as of recently, we've had a couple of the pump stations have the red light on and no one knew the light was on until somebody drove by and said.
And a board had failed.
That should,
Because it's happened at more than one pump station.
well, all I can tell you is if the communication is lost more than 2 or 3 minutes, an alarm will be sent to the operators at this point,
And that's as of now?
as about a month ago.
Okay, that's a concern, because that's not as though it's happened. And I would like to just talk about Breckenshire, the station. That's the one that we always had the wipes issue with,
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
So is there anything that's being done? I mean, obviously, we've tried to communicate out with the public that flushable wipes are not flushable. Please do not flush wipes. But that one seems to be, is there anything we can do in our own infrastructure to help weed them out or anything like that? Because I know it did cause a lot of problems.
Yes, there are baskets that can be installed that are kind of like a little screen. We had talked to Mr. Fetchick about that. I also was told by Mr. Briggs, this is not my project, but that the auger that is being installed at the wastewater plant, he would like to look at moving that to Breckenshire after the larger plant is done as a way to process solids before it reaches the pump. Those are a few things I know have been talked about.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilmember Gearbaugh, any questions or comments for our guest?
Just kind of follow up on a couple other ones. What kind of standardized, and there will be, as you said, automated aspects where if something disconnects, it should notify them, let them know that it isn't working. Where else do we have outdated computers and aspects like that that you're aware of in the system? Have we identified everything, or do we need to go through, because we had the same issue here in our building with our HVAC system, that we're using stuff that's decades old that should have been replaced?
We talked about with the staff, you do have one older control panel at the water plant. It was the original panel put in 20 years ago. We talked about a near-term plan probably should be to replace that panel, just same reasons, 20 years old. But the PLCs, at this point, have been updated, or will be when the wastewater plant project is done, at both the water system and the wastewater.
And then, as you mentioned, operating manuals and all that, how will those be integrated into an overall one that we need to have in compliance with our ACO?
Yeah, they were not required to do that for the pump stations, have that in a master book, but you will have a second book for the pump stations, so that we don't have to submit that to Eagle, but you'll have that available.
That's my concern, is that it sounds like pump stations also experience the same problem we have at the wastewater treatment plant, that maintenance, preventive maintenance, the staff knowledge and everything didn't happen. So wanting to make sure that whatever we're doing, because it's clear that we need to make sure who's got responsibility for these, who's oversight. This may say something more for the city manager to address, but clearly I don't want to have this happen again, similar to what we have been trying to prevent at the wastewater treatment plant.
One thing that just as an outsider, I've been very pleased to see Craig Anderson in particular at the wastewater plant take over the computerized O&M system. And I've seen him use much more frequently than I had in the past which can automatically generate work orders for maintenance. I've been seeing that all over the plant. So those written O&M manuals will have steps to do. Every 6 months do this, every 12 months do that. I would encourage Craig, and I can talk to him about it, to make sure that all those things get into this computer system, which I think would be a benefit, not forgetting something.
Yeah, because I think that's the thing, and then also having that ability to validate that it's actually happening, either through an audit or something of that nature. So whatever we can do to make sure that stuff is accomplished, we need to do it now while we're doing it. So.
That computer system will keep track of what was or wasn't done. That'd be an excellent way to do that.
Perfect. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Delorco, any questions for our guest?
Just a few quick questions related to the SCADA system, Mr. Rubel.
Mm-hmm.
I see this as a very useful tool for providing real-time scenarios of what's going on out in the field and alerting staff to problems. I was curious if it's capable of collecting data for later analysis in the sense of telemetry around peak flows, where we're experiencing severe weather events, surge, and then go back and later look at that and see if we can use that in some useful way.
Yeah, allows quite a bit of that to be collected. Pump run time. The meters, the pump stations don't have their own flow meters. That could be added in the future, but they do keep track of hours of operation, and in particular, as you mentioned, how frequently it operates when it rains, things like that.
Right.
So all that is there and can be extracted and analyzed.
It could help us identify proactive solutions to,
Yes.
to problem solving. Okay, great. And then with having this interconnectivity between the water treatment plant and the wastewater treatment plant through a computer system, do we have any cybersecurity risks or risk mitigation efforts that we need to be thinking about? Because you had mentioned previously with the elevated water tanks, we moved the cell phones onto a dedicated line for the city to circumvent nefarious activity. Is that a concern for you with a web-based application?
Yes, there will have to be networking done with physical electronic firewalls that prevent outside or only authorized parties to access your system. So in any new software that's added, that hardware should be added along with it.
Okay.
So
and that's built into the system?
It will be when the plant project gets going on that component.
Okay, great.
Yep.
Thanks, that's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Delorco. Councilmember Rice, any final questions or comments?
Yeah, I'd actually like to build on what my council colleague, Mr. Delacro, was talking about here. So with the new updated computer systems, do we have the capacity over the next, you said they will probably last about 20 years, to build in any AI aspects of it as well? When we talk about flow rates, things like that, will we be able to start do some machine learning where things become a little bit more automated, a little less hands-on when it comes to getting the pumps going or anticipating, extreme weather pumping needs?
Yeah, that's a interesting question. I am not an AI expert. That's probably the best way to start the answer. The pumps on and off, I think, will still be physical depth in the wet well. But the analysis, as Mr. Delorco indicated, I'm certain could be automated through AI uses down the road. So,
Are we building a capacity that we would be able to handle that with our computers and our?
the data will be collected and stored, so the analytical tools aren't being trained and set up, but the data is all there that it can be added at some point.
Sure, yeah, that's great. That answers.
Server space with AI is the issue. Yeah.
Get up in the cloud.
Buy stock in that company.
Yeah, no, that eases some of my concerns that I have over, the next 10, 20 years. This stuff is going to start happening faster and faster. And, having all of these large projects that we're doing right now, are we at least putting in somewhat of a capacity to be able to keep up with that? Or are we setting ourselves up for 20 years from now going, oh man, we're 20 years behind?
No, I think that's exactly what you're doing with digitizing the data, right? The data. You didn't have any data before. You had to physically write down how many hours it ran between Monday and Thursday when they last visited it. That just isn't useful for much. Now you have data pretty much 24/7 being generated and archived. So.
Great, I appreciate that. Thanks, that's all.
Very good. Mr. Rubel, appreciate your time this evening. I don't expect that we'll see you on our December 18th meeting, so we acknowledge the work that you've done on our behalf this past year. We wish you a very happy holiday season, Happy New Year.
And same to you. Thank you.
We'll see you on the other side. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Rubel. And then it's 2024.
Yeah. This is getting weird.
You guys have a macabre mindset. I meant it in a positive way. All right. We're going to proceed now to the consent agenda. The following consent agenda will normally be adopted without discussion. However, at the request of any citizen or council member, any item may be removed from the consent agenda for council discussion.
Move to approve.
Moved by Gearbout to approve the consent agenda as submitted. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Kamara Sulak. All those in favor of approving the consent agenda signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it. The motion carries unanimously. We move on to the one and only enumerated action item of the evening, which is unfinished business item 23-239, bid award for excavator purchase. This will be a motion to acknowledge receipt of the memo from DPW Director Searles and to award or not to award the bid for purchase of a Taguchi compact excavator from Vehicle Equipment Replacement Fund in the amount of $53,100 to Alta Equipment. Is there a motion?
Move to acknowledge and to award.
Moved by Gearbout to acknowledge and to award. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Seconded by Kamara Sulek. I'll get you on the next one, Mr. Delorco. DPW Director Searles was unable to be with us this evening, so City Manager O'Toole will be taking the lead on this, and I would defer to her.
So we did receive 2 bids for this piece of equipment. It was something we had planned to replace as part of our Vehicle Equipment Replacement Fund. The overall low bid cost did come in slightly above what we had budgeted, but because of material delays with other equipment and some changes that Director Searles is making to our overall vehicle needs, we feel very confident that we're still right on track in terms of expenditures out of that fund this year. So he is recommending that we move forward with that Taguchi compact excavator.
And for the public's edification and benefit, Ms. O'Toole, what is the equipment used for?
The excavator equipment, so this is actually replacing our backhoe, so this will help us with water main breaks. It's a bit more nimble, as it was described to me, in terms of its utility.
Very good. Questions for the city manager? Mr. Gearbaugh?
Are we going to be eliminating any equipment or?
The cat backhoe, so we'll be selling it. And actually, with the sale of the backhoe, we're hoping that we'll be net neutral in terms of the overall impact, but just potentially a small amendment to that verf.
Thank you.
Good. Mr. Kamara Sulek?
Yes. So I remember we discussed this a while ago. Was it the red and white And about how large is it? Does it have more capacity than our current backhoe?
No, my understanding was they wanted to actually move to a smaller piece of equipment that had more capacity to it. So the backhoe's functionality was more limited than the excavators. You guys are really throwing the equipment questions at me. This is not my area of expertise.
Aren't they trying to be more nimble with this so that?
Yeah, the way that this was described to me, and it made perfect sense, is that the backhoe really only has so many functions in terms of its physical mobility, whereas this piece of equipment has more mobility.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I have.
Mayor Pro Tem Dillon?
Thank you, and I'm going to piggyback. I've got an equipment question. All I want to know is this piece of equipment used for the cemetery?
I don't know the answer to that, but I can get you the answer.
The only reason was, would it be classified as part of their budget?
If it was used for the cemetery, they're usually very good about making sure that accounting is correct, so I would guess no, but again, I can confirm that for you.
Thank you.
Any additional questions or comments from the dais? Any subsequent discussion? We have a motion on the floor, then moved by Gearboss, seconded by Kamara Sulak, to acknowledge and to award. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. There is no new business, so we'll transition to our discussion, the discussion portion of our agenda, excuse me. First up is reports and announcements, committee reports from city council members. Again, I'll start to my right and end to my left. Councilmember Kamara Sulak, any reports or committee announcements?
Yes, briefly. So the Saline Youth Council did some volunteer leaf raking for citizens that couldn't do it themselves and would be burdensome to have it paid for, and are planning on doing some additional raking. And they did a great job in participating in the holiday parade on Saturday and kind of leading off. The DEI did some event planning for the 2024 year for what activities that will be and monetary concerns. And the Arts and Culture Committee had a very small showing and just discussed what's going to happen in 2024.
Very good, thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Dillon, reports or committee announcements?
Thank you. Just quickly, the fire board will be meeting this Wednesday, 6 p.m. next door at the firehouse. Zoning Board of Appeals did not receive any requests, so it will not be meeting this month, and Urban County meets on Wednesday.
Very good. Mr. Gearbaugh, any reports or committee announcements?
Just tonight, we approved the alphabet boards. We met on Monday, and all their budgets were approved in tonight's consent agenda, so there's another addition with that. And I just want to promote the Christmas at the Farm from 12 to 4 this coming Saturday. Santa and Mrs. Claus will be there, and some crafters. So please come out and join us at Rentschler Farm.
Again, thank you. Again, with the time for that, Mr. Gearbaugh?
12 to 4.
12 to 4 Sunday.
Saturday.
Saturday, okay. Good thing I am. Councilmember Del Orco, reports or committee announcements?
Nothing to report at this time.
Okay, Councilmember Rice?
Yeah, Parks Commission had a great meeting this couple weeks ago. The mayor joined us as a member of the community to discuss some upcoming investigations that we're going to do on replacing or doing some good overhauls to the romp structure, as well as looking at some fixes and or replacement of the gazebo area and the restrooms. We're going to take some field trips and look at some other parks and have some deep conversations over the next probably 24 to 36 or 12 to 24 months, and try to get some new things happening down in Mill Pond. We'll also have some community engagement as well. So lots coming in 2024 for that, so stay tuned. HDC, we have not had any applications come through, but for both of those groups, we do have 2 openings. So 2 openings on Parks, 2 openings on Historic District Commission, and both groups will be preparing goals and budgeting this month to send off to the city treasurer.
Very good, thank you. Let me just underscore your last point, which is my office in particular will be dealing with board and commission appointments for 2024. That will be actually the bulk of what I'll be spending my time on these next 3 weeks before the end of the calendar year, not only seeking reappointments, but also encouraging folks and vetting individuals to serve on our various boards and commissions, in particular those that have vacancies. That would include HDC, Parks, there'll be a vacancy on planning, arts and culture, et cetera. So if you're in the audience, if you're watching at home, or will be subsequently reading about this meeting, if you want to give back to your community, there are a number of opportunities to do so at the municipal level. So please take a look at our board and committee roster online, and the application is also on that homepage. And I hope you'll seriously consider serving in one or more capacities in 2024. If there's nothing else on item 1, City Manager, in the absence of Community Development Director Harrington, do you want to briefly message on the master plan update?
Yes, Director Harrington just asked that I share an update. The Planning Commission approved the draft master plan at its meeting this past Wednesday. We are, still welcoming until that final approval is provided by council. Any public input, if there are questions, but certainly for council themselves, please take the opportunity to fully review. We will have that as an action item at the December 18th meeting.
Yes, I anticipate that will be the final and most substantive issue on the council agenda for December 18th. I did also speak to Mr. Harrington today, and he encouraged any of you who have questions or concerns, feel free to reach out to him directly. He'd be delighted to meet with you and go through the document in its totality or just specific sections. But it is our intent to cast a final vote on that document in 2 weeks' time. If there's nothing further on the master plan, City Manager O'Toole, would you like to give an update on water quality?
Certainly. So immediate repairs and rehabilitation needs have been fully addressed at the water treatment plant as of this time. The reverse osmosis system is back in service, and rehabilitation of at least 2 of the 3 sand filters is complete. Because it's winter demand, season 2 is sufficient to meet existing demand. We are still completing the rehabilitation of the 3rd filter tank, and that is still on target to be completed before the end of this calendar year. But otherwise, the water that we see leaving the plant is back in line with our targeted parameters, specifically for iron and hardness. DPW is going to continue to do spot flushing and reactive flushing. So again, residents, if they are experiencing any concerns, use our citizen reporting tool. That is the #1 thing we look at when we're identifying where we're going to go, how we're going to strategize dead end and reactive flushing.
City Manager O'Toole, you and I were chatting briefly, I believe either on Thursday or Friday, actually it was Thursday, and DPW Director Searles indicated that spot flushing, particularly of dead end lines in our more quote-unquote problematic areas, was going to begin on Friday. Do you know where DPW is at in that schedule or rotation of completing all of our dead-end lines?
I don't have the update as of the end of the day, but they were still doing it today. We're going to have some good weather this week, so it's their top priority.
Okay. I would recommend that as part of your weekly communique that's sent out either on Thursday or Friday, that you provide an update to City Council, and perhaps we can also put something on the web and on our social media accounts. Questions for the City Manager regarding water quality? Councilmember Rice?
Yes, I have a couple. Mr. Toole and I discussed this earlier this week. Residents have come forth with a request to investigate whether or not there can be any type of reimbursement for materials used during this time, such as filtration, losses due to hard iron in their laundry, things of that nature. And I was wondering if the city manager could make a statement regarding the feasibility of that.
Sure. So there are a few reasons why municipalities really have a more difficult time than, say, like a private entity from issuing discounts or credits. And those, by and large, are associated with maintaining compliance with both statutory and regulatory and legal requirements. So first, there's the obvious issue of really how to effectively design and apply a credit that did not require an extraordinary amount of staff time or manual effort, since that in and of itself would increase the cost of operating the system and thus need to be made up somehow. The second is really to align with those legal requirements. Any sort of credits that are issued need to be tied to a reasonable estimate of the amount of the utility used or deemed not used. So again, determining that gets to the issue of effective program design, but also deciding those qualifying factors on a non-statutory basis would be extremely difficult to prove out, especially after the fact where real-time data can't be captured. So last and perhaps most importantly, one thing I hinted at in that first comment is that these are enterprise funds of the city. So statutorily, we are compliant in that we don't generate excess revenue off their operations. The cost of the utility is equal to the cost of operating and maintaining the system, and any credits issued, therefore, need to be offset either by decreasing costs, which is counterintuitive to the maintenance of the system itself, or increasing user fees, which is basically asking one user to pay for the credits of another. And I understand that these parameters are really not what people understand when they think of utility services or providers, but as a whole, it really is designed at a statutory level to be beneficial to the ratepayer, to ensure that the system costs are equitably divided and are not overly burdensome on one type of user or another, and certainly to ensure that there's no utility provider themselves that's unduly benefiting from the collection of those fees.
I appreciate that thorough answer, and I appreciate you really thinking through it and looking into whether or not we were able to do that. And, what I'm hearing is the explanation is such that we're paying into a system as taxpayers that may have faults that then we can afford to take care of because we have paid taxes into them. So should we give credits back, we're essentially like doubling our payment, because we're eventually going to have to catch up with that by either increasing the water fees or finding that revenue elsewhere.
Correct. It's not a privately operated enterprise, so there is no revenue from which, there's no corporate profits to draw from.
That makes sense. If you don't mind, I do have a second request, and I did want to make this request in front of my council colleagues so that we could all discuss it this evening. I would like to see an after-action report, a very thorough one from this incident. And I think my reasoning for it is that we can learn a lot from what happened. We can also talk about improvements that we've made during this time and improvements that we could make in the future. So I do have a couple of things that I would like to see in our report, and I can email these if my council colleagues are amenable to this request. But I have a brief list here. A timeline of the event. So, when was our first report, or when did we first notice that the RO system was down? Secondly, a map of the citizen report and what the status is of those citizen reports. And again, I can email this so you don't have to judiciously write down if you don't need to. Third, all communications related to this, including public communications, if we could have our PR generals kind of do an analysis of just communications between council and the city to the community, how we've been able to communicate the status, how we've been able to communicate from residents back to the city. And I know that will take a little bit of work and probably communications with all of us. So I'm more than willing to answer any questions that the journalists may have. Any major homeowner issues that were found, for example, the home, and I meant to write down the street name, but the recent one was the water test that was put out on social media that I know was addressed by the water superintendent personally. Just, any of those hot button issues. And then resolution steps that include hours and costs associated at the plant, so overtime to manually operate that reverse osmosis system, the parts cost, if there was any expedited costs to our manufacturer, things like that. And then sum it all up with future prevention and planning, which includes just updates to what Engineer Humphreys talked about with our asset management plan, and then any sort of risk communications plan that may have been an outcome of this as well. I know that that's a lot. I don't have any need for this immediately, but I think it's a great example of ways that we can learn from our community, from things that happen, and we can kind of take a holistic look at how we can improve things in the future or where we did really well. I think that would be really helpful to us.
Thank you for that. Well, we look forward to seeing that in a written communication form via email. And if my colleagues have any additional data points that they would like to see evaluated or provided, I think staff and I would welcome that. I would be clear that when that email goes out, we don't want to engage in a discussion via email, but I think once you provide that in writing and council and staff has some time to digest what you're recommending, we can certainly add this as a discussion item at a future meeting.
That's perfect. Again, no rush on the timeline. I know you're still working through this. I just, maybe in the first quarter of 2024, if we could have some sort of a report to take a peek at.
Any additional comments regarding water quality or questions for the city manager? No?
I have a question, but not water quality.
Okay, you want to articulate it now?
Yes, if I could. So for the edification of many residents wondering when the portion of Old Creek between Michigan Avenue and Henry will be open.
You had Tesha here. I'm sorry, I'll have to ask Engineer Humphreys if she has an official update on that. I mean, technically, the project has met its open to traffic status. I know they were out today trying to do temporary striping, but the pavement was still too wet. But I can follow up with, and we're due for, I expect to do another update on ClearGov, either tomorrow or Wednesday.
And actually, I think Maple Road and the police department are going to be the focus of this week's News Around Saline video as well.
Yep.
So we'll be doing some messaging on the scope of the project, the timeline, why it took so long, and the fact that the main thrust was not on the resurfacing of the street, but rather an upsizing of the sewer main that services our entire West Belt. If there's nothing further.
Just real quick.
Excuse me.
So basically, it's probably mostly the striping that is holding it up.
There's nothing really holding up. There was concrete that needed to cure. So the concrete collars around the manholes were one of the last things that got completed.
Okay.
And those need a specific period of time before you can drive on them again.
Okay.
I don't know, some of them got completed sooner than others, so that's what I'd have to defer with Engineer Humphreys on.
Are they
Okay.
still trying to clear up the lot and everything that they use for the?
Yes, yeah, and they still have to clear out the lot. A lot of the barrels have been removed. They're now being stored on the lot. They'll be clearing off that lot. But that has been their staging area historically.
Okay, thank you.
There's nothing further to be brought up under the discussion portion of tonight's agenda. We come now to the second public comment period. Under the Open Meetings Act, any person may come forward at this time and make comment or question to Saline City Council. This public comment period will be limited to 3 minutes per person. Anyone who would like to speak is requested, but of course not required to state his or her name and address for the record. Are there any citizen comments from those in the audience?
Mary Hess. I really appreciated Brian Rubel's report. It was very enjoyable and informative as a taxpayer. I'm hoping that the council, I noticed the council is going to have a closed session, but it's on things that will be in the future, and I'm hoping that the council will invite the 2 new elected members to the closed meeting, because they will be taking over in less than a month. And the other thing, as far as I was asking Mr. Rubel about our effluent, which is the discharge from manufacturers like American Soy and everything, and he said that they do check the effluent, which is the discharge for chemicals that are discharged, but he's not sure if the council gets a copy. We used to get a copy years ago, and it would be nice. Thank you.
Are there any additional citizen comments this evening?
As a son of a fellow Matt Rockwell, as a son of one of the people's fathers that have passed away and got all thank you notes from you guys, I do really appreciate it. Thank you for letting us, as a Rockwell family, plant a tree in Brecken Park in remembrance of my dad. It touches my heart very, very well, and I hope the city will keep it looking nice, or I can keep it looking nice, one of the two, but I do appreciate the whole city going in on buying this tree for my father.
Thank you, Mr. Rockwell. Any additional citizen comments this evening?
Hi, good evening. Jen Harmount. I just wanted to say I support Councilperson Bryce's request for a reflection on the RO situation surrounding the failure of the ROs. I think that with reflection that we can understand the root cause and we can make sure that we have a good countermeasure moving forward. So thank you for that.
Any additional citizen comments?
Good evening again. I would like to continue to say thanks to the wonderful gentlemen, Kevin and Jim. Serve us also one gentleman not here, Jack Seal. Especially thanks for him not only serve us like all of you, and also the innovation, creativity. The city was beautiful, getting better each day because of what you have been leading us. Reflect the value of excellence, integrity, and innovation. I rise again, continue the first part of my speech, which is the SALT initiative. I'm so excited that to meet again with Mr. Mayor and Jack Seal. I also invite, if possible, Jim and Kevin to give me the honor to be with us. The reason is we need scientists. We need people who dare to speak up, like Jim, even the minority. And also we need participation and local people support. Saline area social services is the great example that we can do a lot of things together. And SALT initiative, the second part, what I'm talking about, the new energy. Imagine 1752, way before this republic was founded, Benjamin Franklin fly kites, harvest the energy into the Leyden jar. We can do the same thing in 2050. We can do the thing in 2030. I just got the news. Probably you know that the president of University of Michigan, Ono, announced that 2030 will purchase all of the electricity from renewable energy. How nice if we can use SALT initiative, generate electricity, and sell it to the university and the local public. It's so easy, just like Benjamin Franklin fly the kites, harvest the electrical charged energy from the cloud, not harness the cloud and thunder. So this is something we can work together. So I cannot wait. I'm just so excited, Mr. Morrow, and two of you and all of you can listen to me. Give me another 17 minutes. I will present it to you. And Governor Whitmore lead this campaign. There are a lot of money flooded down from the White House, from Lansing. It's just want to reach the goal. Renewable energy, we can lead with the Saline River Valley and Huron River Valley, which is Great Lake area, and wind. If Saline, we can lead it. In this new energy, we can lead the whole world. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any additional citizen comments from those in the audience this evening?
Mara McClellan, 807 Arboretum Drive. As a lifeguard for the Saline Rec Center, I think it's safe to say that the Rec Center's pool deck is anything but safe. The current state of the pool deck is highly concerning. It is visually unappealing due to its flaking paint and uneven texture, yes, but there's also an issue that is far more severe. It's slippery. So slippery, in fact, that everyone walking on it faces the risk of a fall. In my year and a half working for the rec, I've seen countless people, myself and my coworkers included, struggle to avoid falling on the slick floor, and I have cared for several people's injuries when they have fallen. In its current state, the pool deck poses more of a risk to patrons than the water does. We have tried to keep the pool deck dry, and we've put rubber mats on high-risk areas, but removing the water is merely a temporary solution, and the rubber mats are disintegrating. For the safety of the rec center's patrons and employees, the pool deck is an issue that urgently needs to be addressed. Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional citizen comments this evening? Let me defer to the city clerk. Did we receive any written communications in advance of tonight's meeting in which the individual wanted their remarks read at this time? Very good. Well, to the last comment, we appreciate you bringing to our attention the condition of the pool deck. Many of us are well aware of its status and that it needs to be replaced or upgraded. I would encourage you, if you are able to either attend or watch next Monday, the 11th, we will be having a special work meeting to discuss the future of the rec center, potential improvements, the financing of the rec center, and how to put it on a more sustainable trajectory. The public is welcome to attend that. We, of course, appreciate all the comments this evening. Mr. Rockwell, again, we express condolences on the passing of your father, and I think it's wonderful that you've been able to work with the Parks Department to plant a tree on municipal property in his memory. That's very nice. The city manager and city clerk can remind me, but I think we've addressed this issue over the past 10 years on maybe a dozen separate occasions, but there is a statutory prohibition that prevents council members elect from participating and attending a closed session. Is that correct?
Yes, my understanding of closed session is you have to be a immediate subject to the issue, and as you will note from our agenda, we are coming out of closed session to take action, so there will be public action associated with it.
Very good. Okay. And of course, the city of Saline is a little different than a number of municipalities in that the council members elect actually have to wait approximately 2 months to take their office. So on occasion, that creates some issues and some minor hiccups, but nothing that can't be worked through. Please note our upcoming meetings, including a special meeting next Monday at 6 p.m. again to discuss the rec center as previously articulated. At this time, the chair would entertain a motion to go into closed session pursuant of MCL 15.681C for city council to consider negotiations of a collective bargaining agreement.
So moved.
Moved by Gearbaugh to convene, seconded by Kamara Sulek. The clerk will please call the roll.
Yes.
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 Yes, we are convened into closed session at 8:17 p.m. and we will reconvene at the conclusion of our closed session.
For at least the first part.
Should I leave or are you?
It's up to you. I have no idea how long it will be, Zach.
I can stay.
Are you going to wait in here? How long were you going to give us? 15 more minutes, yeah?
We should be out in 15 minutes.
Yeah. Terry, why didn't Chad have his zapper on today?
Because he had it.
That's how I've been last.
Motion now to reconvene into regular session at 8:42 PM. Moved by Gearba. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Dillon. The clerk will please call the roll to reconvene into regular session.
Councilmember Kamara.
Yes.
Councilmember Delorto.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Dillon.
Yes.
Councilmember Gearba.
Yes.
Councilmember Rice.
Yes.
Yes, we are reconvened into regular session. The chair at this time would entertain a motion to approve or not to approve the letter of agreement with the Police Officers Labor Council as submitted.
Move to approve.
Moved by Gearba to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Rice. And again, my apologies, that is slightly revised language, very slightly revised language from what was previously enumerated on the agenda. Is there any discussion on the motion? There appears to be none, then I'll call for a vote. It's been properly moved by Gearba, seconded by Rice to approve. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay.
Nay.
Ayes have it, and the motion carries 5-1. If there's nothing further to be brought, with one absence, of course, if there's nothing further to be brought, up at tonight's meeting, the chair would entertain a motion to adjourn at 8:43 PM.
So moved.
Moved by Gearba. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Kamara Sulak. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you all. Have a good night. We'll see you next Monday at 6 PM.